Hello, everyone. My name is Mistress Christiana McGrain. I am from the Kingdom of Meridies. And in my mundane life, I am also known as Ask Chef Christy, which is my website. I've been a chef instructor for 25 years, a professional chef for many years longer than that, and learned as an apprentice chef. I didn't serve an apprenticeship in the SCA. I'm a Laurel and a Pelican, but I did not do that. But I did serve an apprenticeship in the mundane world as a chef's apprentice for 3 years. And I did that at the same time that I was learning to cook feasts in the SCA. So my food service experience has gone hand in hand with learning medieval feasts and everything that we do in the SCA for 40 plus years now. So I am also a ServSafe instructor. And ServSafe is the National Restaurant Association's Safe Food Handling Certificate program that offers two different levels for food handlers. One of them is the Food Handler Certificate. That certificate is for people who will be working in kitchens. It's done online. It costs $15, and it's a certificate that lasts for 3 years. It's the basics, and we're going to cover those basics in this class. So I'm going to tell you that once you have completed today's class, you will be ready to go and take the food handler course. There is a second level called the Food Manager course. That is a longer training, usually 8 hours when I do it, and a proctored exam, and then that certification lasts for 5 years. The food handler course is what the majority of sites that the SCA is using these days is requiring of someone on the staff of the food service team. So the food handler is the lower key one. It's the one that costs you $15, and it's the one we're going to cover pretty closely today. However, I am going to do this class with a veneer or a filter, if you will, of the SCA because we cover situations where we serve food that are not covered in ServSafe. For example, primitive sites. That's not something that you're going to hear about in that kind of training. So we're going to get started with that. I've got a PowerPoint that I'm going to get started up. Guess I'm going to more. There we go. Share screen. There we go. I'm going to advance the first slide. Please give me a thumbs up to make sure that when I advance that you're actually seeing the advance as well. Are we seeing on-site prep? Yes, fantastic. Okay, so let's talk about the top 10 food safety practices for SCA kitchens. The first thing that we want to address is off-site food prep and transportation. You're usually going to be purchasing from off-site areas. You're probably not going to be ordering through something like a food service like Cisco. Occasionally, sites will have that service, but I think I've run into that once or twice in decades of doing this. So you want to plan your shopping trips with the staying power of your perishables in mind. Have empty coolers and boxes with you that you can pack things into if you can get ice or cold packs, and do that later in the trip so that your perishables are fresher. You can certainly do your dry goods and things that are shelf stable shopping months in advance. But when you're talking about the fresh things, you want to make sure that you have storage room at home to be able to hold this stuff and that you can get it to site in an easy manner so that it will stay good during your trip. You want to plan your trip to avoid traffic jams and rush hour if possible, because sitting still with several hundred pounds of food thawing in your vehicle is stressful for you and the vehicle and the food. So kind of think about your route, your transportation. Part of your whole purchasing plan includes the logistics of it. And you want to plan your arrival on site with helpers that can be there to help unload things and get things directly into coolers and sinks as need be. It's really best if you are not the one lifting and carrying things inside, that you stand there and expedite and say, these things go into coolers, these things go into the dry goods storage over here. This is going to be the first thing they do, so it's going to be over here. We're going to sanitize the counters first. You've got the flow going and you can supervise that happening. I've seen many times where things got unloaded in a higgledy-piggledy manner and are lost until you're packing up to go home. And you put a lot of time and energy into sourcing or creating this particular ingredient, and because it didn't get stored in a manner where it was sensible to find it, it gets overlooked and not served at the feast, and that's just heartbreaking. So you want to make sure that you keep an eye on how things are being loaded into the kitchen when you get there. All right, let's talk about primitive kitchens. Let me get rid of this floating heating control. There we go. So when you're going to a primitive site, you need to assess the site for various aspects. Is there water? Is there hand washing facilities? If there is not either one of those things, how are you going to accommodate those? Because you have to have both of those things. So you're going to be bringing in water, you're going to be providing hand washing facilities, and how is that going to happen? Um, you want to get all of the details up front from the site. You don't want to walk onto a site and be surprised, especially if it's the fact that nothing is there. So, along with hand washing facilities, you want to have hand sanitizers, but hand sanitizers alone are not acceptable for food preparation. So, you have to have something to be able to do hand washing with. You want to have cover. You want to have trash removal. Is there a dumpster? Are you taking all of the trash off site? And who's going to be in charge of that? And did you bring sufficient bags to take that away? Um, are pit or ground fires allowed in the place that you're going to be cooking? If not, then how are you going to accommodate that? What kind of equipment do you need to bring in? What kind of seating is there going to be? Is everybody going to bring their own tables and chairs? Are you going to accommodate your diners that way? All of the aspects on a primitive site have to be determined first, because it's not like you're renting a hall and walking in and there's equipment and there are tables and chairs and AC and running water and all of the things already there for you. So this is one of those areas that we have to kind of go above and beyond what a food handling program would talk to us about, because this is a situation that's more specific to the kind of events that we do in the SCA. So then we talk about storage. Non-perishables like bottled, canned, and dried food items, spices, paper, and disposable items can all be bought ahead of time, as long as you have got a clean, dry, safe place to store them, like not in your garage. Um, then you can do that. But you want to make sure that you can keep them away from animals and, things that might mess those things up. Have a plan about where pre-cooked and pre-purchased perishable items will be stored until transported to site. Always cool foods completely and keep them below 41 degrees while transporting them. So you need to guarantee that something's going to stay below 41 degrees the whole time that it is in transit. The feast planner should supervise as others unpack, directing items to appropriate storage areas. Before any food is unloaded at site, check the temps on all of the coolers and freezers to make sure they're within usable ranges. Coolers should be below that 41 degrees. We're going to talk about that 41 degrees a lot because that's the lower end of the danger zone. And a cooler that's not been used or had the door opened in some time should be closer to 36 degrees Fahrenheit. Freezers should read somewhere between 0 and 20 degrees Fahrenheit, and frozen food such as dairy products should be stored at 6 to 10 degrees Fahrenheit. So take your own thermometers with you to be able to check these things. The pictures that we've got on this slide, the one on the left is an ice house from the 6th century in Iraq, where it is still functioning today to store ice. And the lower one is from New England, or England, I'm sorry, from England. But both of those are structures to store ice for food preservation. All right, hand washing and volunteer staff health. Make sure you have a designated hand sink and that you use it and that everyone in your kitchen knows that that's what it's for and that they use it regularly. If you're renting a hall, generally, if it's a commercial kitchen, you'll have one, if not more, hand sinks, and they're usually small metal or white porcelain, and they're off to the side, and they've got hand soap, and they've got hand towels, and a trash can, and hot and cold running water, which are the minimums. Do not let your staff wash produce or do food prep in those sinks. That is not what they are for. They are specifically only for hand washing, and everybody should know that. I don't generally use antibacterial hand soap. I like Dr. Bronner's personally, but I do like to use an antibacterial hand soap dispenser on hand sinks like that because the word antibacterial hand soap reinforces that process for people. Oh, that's why I'm using this because hands, right? Don't let people do try to avoid letting people do hand washing in food preparation sinks. It's got to be separate. Um, Sometimes if you don't have a separate hand washing sink, you have to make that work, but you do need to keep an eye on not washing your hands over food, right? That would contaminate the food. Um, so you want to set up separate hand washing, dishwashing, and food prep areas if at all possible. Kindly turn away ill or inebriated volunteers. This is one that's an SCA specific. Well, I don't know about SCA specific, but it's certainly more SCA and definitely more volunteer specific. People show up and want to help, but they've been having a good time, or they're not feeling good and they've got that, but I promised to help mentality. That's nice, but you need to be able to say, no, I'm sorry, I don't want to expose whatever you've got going on to the kitchen. And if you're not feeling well, maybe it's best if you, you know, stood and took people's feast tokens or something, give them a different job. Um, do not let people use their personal pocket knives on the food. We all in the SCA are carrying knives, but what was the last thing you used that knife for? Was it cutting a tent rope? Was it prying a tent spike up out of the ground? I mean, people use these knives for all sorts of things. Make sure you have enough utensils to be able to have people use safe, clean kitchen utensils in your kitchen. Hair restraints are important. Bring nets or barrettes or bobby pins or just hair shoelaces to be able to tie people's hair up out of the way if possible. Encourage people to wear comfortable, washable, non-binding clothing and no loose dangling jewelry. And again, here we are back to an SCA specific thing. Loose dangling jewelry around the neck can be caught in a spinning Hobart, or it can be caught by a dishwasher, or it can heat up as you open an oven and the chain around your neck suddenly is burning you. So the kind of jewelry that we tend to wear in the SCA can be problematic for food safety, and you just need to be aware of that. Closed-toed shoes are a must. No bare feet in the kitchen. Don't care what your persona is. That's not safe for you for a lot of reasons. Gravity works. Things will fall. Knives will fall. Heavy things will fall. Hot things will splash. So that's a really important one. And you, as a feast planner or somebody who's working the event, need to plan rest breaks because you need to make sure that you stay rested and alert and are available and aware to prevent or to react if things go awry. All right, allergies and ingredient lists. We definitely want to post ingredient lists outside the hall. Now, this topic is probably the one that will get the most heated and the most ongoing rumbling amongst a bunch of cooks. Everybody has their opinion about this, and it is very, very important. As somebody with a lot of food issues myself, I want to make sure that the list is complete so that I can make a decision for myself. Now, as far as I'm concerned as a diner, that's your responsibility to me ends there. If you're making a big meal and you've got a bunch of stuff that I can't eat in it, I want to know what those things are, but I don't expect you to cook a whole bunch of stuff for me separately unless I contact you or you have made it an indication that it's easy for me to make some substitutions. Please let me know. And I will always do that when I'm cooking. But I don't think that it's the cook's responsibility to bend over backwards to prepare a separate meal for everybody who signs on to a feast. Other feast creds have other opinions on that, and I respect that. Everybody's got their own take on this. But as a food service professional, I know how important it is to make sure the list is accurate. That's where I want to come down on that side of it. Everybody can make their own informed decision as long as my staff and I are both very careful to make sure that the list is update current. Even if we are saving labels off of packaged goods so that we can show people those labels later, that we're going all through that. That we're not cheating, that, oh, no one will notice. Yeah, they will. And that's just wrong. That's not chivalric. That's not what we're about in the SCA anyway. And you want to be vigilant and avoid cross-contamination because everybody has different allergies. And so you want to make sure that if you don't say that there's garlic in this dish and you cut something on a cutting board that had garlic cut on it before, then you have basically added garlic to a dish and not noted it. So cross-contamination comes into play here because you don't want to inadvertently add an ingredient to something that it wasn't supposed to be there. So that takes us to cross-contamination. Microorganisms move around easily. They transfer from food, unwashed hands, clothing, packaging, environmental pollution, and more. You want to keep clean and sanitize, and we'll talk about the difference between those things in a second. Prep tables, equipment, utensils, cutting boards, doorknobs, handles, light switches, on-off switches on equipment, all sorts of things after each task. Going down and wiping things down is a great thing to do. You want to assign specific equipment to each type of food product. For example, poultry should have its own cutting board. Things should be sanitized in between uses, etc. If you only have one prep table, say you're on that primitive site and you've got limited space, you want to prepare your raw meat and fish and poultry and ready-to-eat foods all at different times with a complete wipe down and sanitizing in between each step. And purchase ingredients that require minimal preparation. If you've got that sort of environment, don't buy something that has to have 2 or 3 steps done to it. Buy something that's pre-baked or just has to be baked off, or, cut a couple of the prep steps out so that you don't have to worry about the contamination steps in your process if you're dealing with that kind of primitive space. All right. That brings us to thawing. You want to thaw under refrigeration and not at room temperature. This is the safest way to thaw things out. Thanksgiving is coming up, and I will be fielding how to thaw my turkey questions for the next 2 weeks. It's a very big topic of conversation, right? Under refrigeration is the surest, safest method. But who has time for that, right? And a lot of times you end up with something that's still frozen and you need to quick thaw. So under tepid running water is the next best method for this. And that is in a bucket, like a food safe bucket. If you're on a site and you've got a big stainless steel sink, you can put a big 5-gallon white bucket down in the sink, put whatever it is, like let's say it's a turkey. I know that's not SCA period specific, but you know what I'm talking about. You put that down in and you turn the water on so that it will run at a very low rate. It can just dribble, but once the bucket is full, the water will dribble out as the new water dribbles in. And it needs to be around 70 degrees Fahrenheit. And the transfer of the water will take the heat or the coldness away from the turkey and will transfer it out. And the motion of that water will help thaw the bird or whatever it is you're trying to thaw out much faster than just leaving it sitting on a counter. So if you think I'll just put it on a counter and it'll thaw faster, this method actually exceeds that. You can thaw it as part of the cooking process. Say you've got flat chicken breasts and they're frozen and you intend to put them on a griddle and sear them. You can do that and thaw them as part of that process. We don't generally use microwaves in the SCA, but you can use a microwave to thaw something if it's going to be immediately before service. Think like a TV dinner, right? Um, and then again, take your own oven, fridge, and food thermometers to check temps in all equipment and foods. All right, that brings us to time and temperature abuse. Um, and this is Saint Sebastian being tormented on a griddle over here. I just thought that was perfect for time and temperature abuse. So the temperature danger zone that you must remember is between 41 degrees and 135 degrees Celsius. And things that grow in that danger zone include bacteria and parasites, and us. So those comfortable temperatures for life are where you want to keep food out of as much as possible in order to not have food safety issues because the bacteria and all those things will grow exponentially if they're kept in that temperature zone. So you want to keep things below 41 degrees or above 135 degrees. Once you're serving something, let's say you're putting out a day board, for example, and you have got foods that are going to be sitting out without any temperature control. There's no ice, there's no chafing dish, no flame, nothing. They're just sitting out. You have 4 hours to serve that food, at which point it must be discarded, not wrapped back up and put back in the cooler. It must be discarded after 4 hours. So what that means is don't put the whole tray out. Put out half a tray. And then when you need to refresh it, you start over. Your 4 hours starts over again because the new batch hasn't been sitting out the whole time. So you kind of have to time it out that way. But you can leave things sitting out without any temperature control, and you've got 4 hours to do it. But that does not make leftovers. And that's a really important fact that a lot of people are not aware of. So make sure that you understand that. Yes, you can just serve it at room or serve it from a room temperature setting. The food is hot, we assume, but after 4 hours, it's got to go. If you're going to store some aside, say you've baked a bunch of oats, frumenti for meal, and you plan on serving some of that for dinner, for breakfast the next morning, take out what you're planning on serving and go ahead and let that cool and be in the fridge. Don't let that be sitting out all night and then try to store that away. Make sure your cooking temperatures are correct for whatever it is that you're cooking, that you're holding it for service at the correct temperature, and when you're reheating pre-cooked foods, that you bring things back up to the correct temperatures. And when in doubt, throw it out because having a menu that's a little shy for your diners is preferable to serving something that's either burnt beyond recognition or will make people sick. Go ahead and throw it away. It's the better plan. It really is. It's hard. It's a very, very hard thing to do, but that's all right. Let's see if the next, no. Okay, let me go back here. All right, so cooking does not kill all pathogens that can be present in food after being time temperature abused. Most time temperature abuse happens in SCA kitchens when the event purchases exceed the storage capabilities of the homes of those shopping and prepping for the feast, and food sits out until it's driven to the site with items unloaded from cars by volunteers and not placed into an appropriate cooler or freezer, while thawing foods incorrectly, while cooling large stock pots of food from the stove. When you're making big pots of soup or stew or great big deep stock pots, one must spread the surface area out into smaller containers so that it will cool faster because you'll have a thermal mass inside the middle of that thing that will still be warm the next morning if you don't spread it out. And of course, then your danger zone has been exceeded and you've got bacteria overgrowth, etc. And then with foods used as leftovers that were not stored incorrectly or not stored correctly or in a timely fashion. So those are the ways that we can get into trouble, the most likely ways we're going to get into trouble in the SCA in our food preparation. I am going to stop for questions when we get to the end. Cannot see my chat right now. So if you guys have questions and want to put it in the chat, go ahead and I will come back around to them. I'm sorry I haven't stopped and said that up till now. But I'm just going to go through the whole thing and then we'll talk about all of this when we get to the end. When using one prep table, prepare raw meat, fish, and poultry and ready-to-eat foods at different times. Oops, I went to the about wrong place. Okay. Cooking large batches of food. This is one that can trip up SCA cooks because you can be a very good home cook. You can be a very good research cook, but you may not have a lot of experience at cooking large quantities of food. And the physics change a little bit when you're getting into big industrial sized stoves that may or may not be as efficient as your one at home, and big batches that then the volume is different. So you want to expand your cooking times. You want to spread the surface area out so that it's wider and not deeper. And that counts for the cooling method I just talked about, but it also counts for cooking. You don't want to overload an oven full of chicken. Do 2 trays of chicken rather than 3 if you've got 3 racks. Putting as much food in the oven as you can possibly get in just cuts down on the airflow and it will slow everything down, if not leave a lot of undercooked chicken, and that's nobody's ideal meal. Bake your grains wherever possible. And I'm not talking about bread here. I'm talking about rice as a pilaf or bulgur or frumenti or any of those kind of porridgey grains. Do that baked in an oven rather than a stovetop, and you'll avoid that goopy brown blackened thing on the bottom of a big stock pot. And allow ample time to cool completely and reheat thoroughly. You can't just let something cool down to say 70 degrees and then back up to serving temperature because you've stayed in the danger zone that entire time. You have to let it cool all the way down to below 41 degrees and then reheat it all the way back up. And if that's not practical, then you have to time your cooking right before service, where the thing is going to be cooked right before it's ready to serve. It's not something that can be pre-made. Or if it has to be pre-made at home and frozen and then reheated, because you have to get the timing on that right. Okay. Cleaning and sanitizing. So there's a difference between these two terms. Cleaning removes food and debris from a surface such as a prep area, visible food. I've wiped it down, I've gotten all the crumbs off of it. Sanitizing reduces microorganisms to safe levels. Sanitizing can be accomplished by heat or chemical methods. So heat sanitizing is 30 seconds in water heated to 171 degrees Fahrenheit and then air dried. Air dried is something they're going to ask you on the test. I'll just throw that in there. Chemical sanitizers then are usually either chlorine or iodine, and there's usually a time that's meant to be used in them. I use a Quartz type sanitizer here at home sometimes, and it's 60 seconds. And we make it warm water, but it can be room temperature water, but the time period on it is what's significant. So you have to read the packaging of the type of sanitizer that you're going to use. A lot of sites that we use have commercial Hobarts. They have the process already worked into them, and you just need to be familiar with the machine that you're using. Most sites that I have seen have got a printout on the wall someplace with instructions of how to set it, what temperatures to make sure it's at, where the refill is for the sanitizers and things like that. So it's all part of the same process, whether you're doing it by hand or whether you're doing it through a machine. Chemicals and cleaners have to be separately stored from food and food prep areas. If you don't have the room to put them in a separate place, they should be stored underneath. And there's a method of storing food in a refrigerator by the temperature that it gets recooked for. So basically, if anything's going to drip on it, it has to be reheated before it gets cooked, before it gets served. So like ready to eat food would be on the top because nothing's going to drip on that. And then the shelf below that would be vegetables and eggs that would be heated to 135, and then steaks and chops would be 145, and then ground meats would be 155, and then anything reheated or made of a melange of different ingredients is 165 degrees. And so things are stored on the shelf in order of those temperatures. And likewise, chemicals and sanitizing is all the way at the bottom so that it's never going to drip onto food. So you can just kind of think about that. What's going to drip as to how things get stored. Keep your chemicals in their original containers. If you have to switch bottles, make sure you label them really, really well. If you're putting a cleaning solution in a spray bottle, for example, make sure that it's really accurately um, uh, labeled and that it has either a website or an emergency phone number attached to it. So if somebody gets it in their eyes or something, you've got the information to hand. And then make sure that you've got a plan for your trash disposal and your recycling. So, one more time, I want to cover the ServSafe food handler and food manager. The food handler is a 3-year certificate. It's done online. It takes under an hour. Um, eh, maybe a couple of hours. I just had some folks that were going through cancer treatments, the whole family. I made them take the food handler course so that they all were on the same page about sanitizing and temperatures and wiping down all of the devices and everything. And it's $15. So that's the food handler. That's the one that most sites are asking for. Food manager is a 5-year certificate. There's a textbook that's about an inch thick that goes with it. It's got about 8 hours of training that goes with it. It's a proctored exam. It costs about $150 to do it, and it's a 5-year certificate. So I think I would like to see anyone who works on an SCA feast, everyone, at least the top 2 or 3 people, to have the food handler. It's easy. There's no age limit. Anybody can get it. And then I further feel, and this is just Mistress Christiana's little soapbox, nobody has this as an official rule, that any large group that does regular feasts should have at least one person that's got the food manager. Somebody who's in the group and it's active, who's got the food manager, who can look at stores, who can look at sources and, talk with each one of the feast crats, make sure they've got the food handle. I would feel so much better if that we instituted that as policy, but all I can do is say, this is my, I think this is what we should do. And those are my contact information down there at the bottom. I've got a website, askchefchristy.com, email chefchristy@kingstaste.com. We were talking about King's Taste, To the King's Taste in the Max Miller talk. My business is called King's Taste Productions. And then my Facebook page is Chef Christy-ATL. Okay, so I am going to escape that, stop my screen share, and now I can see my messages. Feast is not mandatory. No one is entitled to it. Don't be an ass from either side. I'm not sure if that was directed to this. Yes, oven baked rice is so easy and works perfectly. Okay, great. That's great. Who else would like to chime in? I know you've got stuff to say. I know you do. All right, let me ask a question. Who here has got a food handler certificate? Anybody?
I
Okay.
actually was going to get one right before my feast that I cooked yesterday, but my niece who lives with me has one.
Mm-hmm.
I made sure there was one person in my kitchen who had one.
And that's really good. And theoretically, that's the way that is supposed to work, where businesses can take one person, get them trained, and then they're supposed to take that information back to their group,
Yeah.
to the people who work for them. Some people are better at training than others, and to ask that of every person that takes the food service manager exam, I think is unrealistic. I don't think that information moves back and forth that way. Um, Should we all be wearing gloves when handling food or washing hands just as good? That is an excellent question. I personally feel like scrupulous hand washing technique trumps gloves every time. However, if you are working with ready to eat food, which is food that will not be cooked again between the time that you touch it and somebody's going to eat it, it's really best practices to use gloves for that. So if you're putting something on everybody's plate, the person who's got that doing that job, having them wear gloves is a great idea because then you're assuring that there's no hand contact to something that's not being reheated. Every municipality, every locality has their own rule about the glove thing. So I can't tell you what the practice is. I can just tell you eh, ServSafe really stresses hand washing and the fact that hand sanitizer is not acceptable for food handling. Hand sanitizer is toxic. You can't get that on the food. So it works if you're on a primitive site and you've got porta potties and you want to sanitize your hands when you're coming out of the potty. But before you handle food, you need to wash your hands properly 20 seconds, water as warm as you can tolerate, soap, lather, the whole nine yards, right? So I take gloves with me when I'm doing food prep at sites. I'm a scrupulous hand washer, been doing it for a really, really long time. So it's just really second nature to me. But it is just easier sometimes if you just don't have to wash your hands 50 million times. If your hand are in something goopy and you can do gloves with it, it does become more convenient. So I'm sorry, that's not a yes or no answer. It was a long way around to say, well, maybe. Yeah, yeah. If somebody gets a cut and you need to put a band-aid on it, and then of course they're going to need to wear a glove on top of that. So having gloves on hand is definitely, I definitely do that all the time. Um, it's not something you really want. The problem is people put gloves on and then they think that their hands are magically clean forever. And the gloves get dirty. And if you're not thinking about washing the gloves and you think that you've got gloves on so everything's good, you're only as good as the last thing that you touched. So, gloves are not the be all and end all. It's a matter of training. So it's a really, really good question and one that's worth talking to with your staff about, the volunteers that are working in the kitchen about like, are you the last person that's going to touch that before that goes in somebody's mouth? Why don't we wear gloves for that? You know, so that's good. Um, Always believe in hand washing. Yes, indeedy. Yeah, yeah. I mean, that's fine if you're going to wear gloves to touch money, as long as that's the only job you're doing is touching the money and you're keeping your hands clean from the money. But then don't turn around and do food service with that same glove because
Yeah, no, they're doing food service. It's like,
it, taking
no,
food, preparing food and taking money with the same set of gloves on.
no,
Yes,
yep,
no.
nope.
That's yeah.
Ew.
That's a no. That's definitely a no. Um, okay. Anybody else have any comments, questions? Oh, wait a second. I have prompts. So, having listened to this litany of things that we tend to do in the SCA, do you think there's something that you'll do differently now? Yes. Okay. Would you share that with us? I can see people typing.
Well, how about this? I won't type.
Okay.
Um, as somebody who does Cook's Playdated onto your West War, I'd say yes and no, because we have kicked people out of our camp for unsafe food practices before. Um, I am the one that brings the camp kitchen sink, and we're pretty good at hauling out trash and emptying the sink water. And we're not 100%. We did discover that yes, there needs to be people that check, do we have enough of this and this and this, because the person with the sanitation tablets was not the one in camp
Mm-hmm.
all the time. So somebody
Mm-hmm.
else has to have the sanitation. That's another thing, is like, if somebody's going to bring a thing and suddenly they can't make it, somebody else also needs to bring the thing. So
Mm-hmm.
maybe have backup plans for super, super important things in case somebody can't make it.
Right.
Like they like to say it because it is a
Yeah,
primitive site. We bring our own
backups are
water and
always Always good. And Hilder, is that, am I pronouncing your name correctly, Hilder? Never thought about checking temps for fridges and gloves for the person plating the food. Checking the temps in the fridges. You don't think about that because you think, I have rented this site, therefore I have rented working things. How many people here have walked onto a site, even after doing a pre-walkthrough, have walked onto a site to find non-functioning equipment?
Yesterday, as a matter of fact, yesterday.
Look at all the hands, right? Okay. And I have definitely had this happen where I walk through, everything's good, and then when I come back to the day of the feast, not good. Gone. Completely gone in some cases. Wait, there was a whole refrigerator here. What happened to it? Kind of gone, you know? So, yeah, bring in your own refrigerator or your own thermometers that read oven and freezer and refrigerator and food temp, like, insertion thermometers are is really important because if you get there and you know your fridge is too warm, then you're either sending people out to buy ice really fast and you're gathering up coolers, or you're calling the park ranger and going, we got a problem, somebody's got to get here before the end of the afternoon on Friday to recharge the Freon or something. So making sure that the equipment, that's the first thing you do when you get on site, is make sure you're all, crank your ovens up, make sure they're coming on. Make sure you got hot water coming out of the taps. Make sure the refrigerator is at the right temp. Make sure the dishwasher is working. While you've still got time to do something about it before the first piece of food is unpacked. That is your first job, is making sure you've got equipment that's functional. Because if it's not, then either A, you can't do the feast that way or at all, or you've got to just, tap dance, make changes.
Mm.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah, it's just it's so much easier than guessing. I mean, I know how to test meat for the right temperature, but on a big piece of meat, I'm still going to use a meat thermometer to be double sure, you
Oh,
know?
and I was gonna say, none of us really have the day-to-day experience of the cooking on coals that we do in Cook's Playdate, or especially the time we did the bread oven to know what temperature it was at. But
Hmm.
a success story, actually, this year I successfully did raw tuna poke and served it for dinner. I bought it, frozen that
How
day.
many
It half
how many people did you do that for?
30
Okay.
ate on it, I would say at least. There's a couple dozen in camp, and then we get
30
extra.
is not 30 is a
Yeah.
really manageable number for that.
Well,
If
it
you
was a
had
small
said
bowl.
200, I would have been
No, no,
going,
no. It's a small bowl, right?
yeah,
It was like two steaks, and we each get a tiny piece. So we,
yeah,
we all each get a tiny piece of everybody's food.
sure.
But I had only half thawed it out, so it was just thawed enough to
Hmm.
cut it. And then I seasoned it all up, and put it back in the bowl in the cooler on ice, and then it got served in a separate bowl of ice on the table with the lid on it.
So
And
you
everybody was fine.
maintained the proper food
Yes.
temperature the whole way through the service of it. So perfect. That's
And my
great.
laurels
And
my
you
laurels
didn't
dubious
try to do it for 200 people. So
no, and my
good
laurels
on you.
dubious advice now is always take the advantage to eat raw fish in a hayfield. If you know the cook, right? If you know the cook.
Right. If you know the cook, and a lot of people will eat stuff that I give them even if they're a little suspect because they know that I'm going to have paid attention. But somebody asked me earlier today about food poisoning in the SCA, and I said, well, I have had food poisoning myself. I don't think I have ever given anybody food poisoning. To my knowledge, I have never been the cause of anybody getting food poisoning. And I've been a professional chef and chef instructor since the 80s. So knock wood, I hope that that's true. If I have never heard about it. But I've given myself food poisoning many times. I have
My
had
my
it
friends will
from
still remind me about the oyster shooter
I
incident.
have I
It's a
have
thing.
had it from other restaurants. I've just had bad food, but I've also a couple of times done refrigerator clean out dish, and maybe one of those ingredients probably should not have been included in that. So, yeah, but we have had feasts where people have gotten sick. The one that I was most familiar with here, everybody who went to the event came home with the flu. And as it turned out, it was not feast related. It was the person sitting at troll. And they greeted absolutely everybody who showed up to the event, and they had the flu. So it wasn't foodborne, but it was event borne. And we all went home miserable from it. So, kind of splitting hairs as to whether it was the food or, everybody had to go through the same source. So,
This
yeah, there's a lot of things to be. We want to be casual, and it's a bunch of friends, and we all want to have a good time, and we don't want to take ourselves too seriously, except when it comes to martial activities on the field, when it comes to safety regulations with kids, when it comes to food safety, and when it comes to, first aid, things like that, there are things that we do need to take seriously. And this is one of those things. Um, yeah, not silly. It's not silly. And it's also not sexy. But I'm thrilled to see this many people show up for a food safety class because that's fantastic. And as I was saying at the top of the hour that we had a lady in my kingdom say, "Would anybody be interested if I taught this?" And people came back and said, "Oh, Mrs. Christiana teaches this." And I said, "Yes, I do. You should also go forth and take this information and spread it around and encourage people to get on the ServeSafe site and do the food handler." Like I said, I've covered it. We have talked about sanitation, we've talked about cross contamination, we've talked about the temperature danger zones, we've talked about personal hygiene, we've talked about a lot of other things that are SCA specific that aren't on the food handler, but that's basically the information. Now they're going to go into a little bit more detail. You're going to sit and take the training on it, but we've already covered it. It's nothing scary. That's it. Now, when you do the food manager, then there's the dreaded chapter 2 where you have to memorize all of the foodborne illnesses and the symptoms and where they originate from and their Latin names. But that doesn't happen in the food handler one, so don't be scared.
this
Uh,
has made me feel really good. If I can get sick from food, I do. And so my boyfriend always gives me a hard time because if it's sat out on the counter at home,
mhm.
for if he forgot it and left like mayo out, I'm like throw it in the trash can. I only eat leftovers after like a day or two, and then I throw it out. I'm super paranoid because if anybody's gonna get sick, it's gonna be me.
You're the canary in the coal
And
mine for that.
and it's caused arguments sometimes because it's a perfectly good jar of mayonnaise, but I'm like, no, that's going in the trash can. I don't care. I don't care how expensive it was. We're throwing it out.
Mayonnaise is actually shelf stable at room temperature. So it's
I know. I'm paranoid
once it
though.
is mixed into a salad, like a protein salad, like chicken salad, egg salad, that's when it can go bad. But by itself in a jar, fresh.
Really? Okay, I'm not going to tell him you said that because I'm still going to
Okay,
throw it out.
fine.
Okay.
Oh, I don't want to cause any more
Oh.
arguments in your home, so that's fine. But just for your peace of mind.
I do have a question maybe that y'all could ask about leaving things out. So I pre-bake my chicken for the week, and we have a Bluetooth thermometer that syncs to my phone, which by the way is super best invention ever, because then it just pings at me when it's 165. Uh, but it's in Pyrex, and I cannot put that straight into the fridge, obviously, because it's hot and Pyrex will crack. What would be a good amount of time to leave that out before I can go put it in the fridge, go cook, chop it up, and put it in the fridge?
Let me think about this for a second, because there's a very specific answer to this. You've
Because
got
also, like, the chicken's really, frankly, too hot to chop up
you've
when it's straight
got
out of the oven.
2 hours. I believe this is correct. You've got 2 hours to reduce it from above the temperature danger zone to room temperature or around 70 degrees.
Okay.
And then 4 hours to reduce it down to below. So that gives you 2 hours of something sitting out to come down to room temperature at counter. But if it's a big, deep pot of stock, it's not going to cool in 2 hours.
You
So
know, it's just a couple chicken breasts.
that right. Okay. So a
Yeah,
couple
yeah,
chicken breasts, definitely you've got plenty of time within an hour, get them in the refrigerator and you're fine. If it's a big pot of stock or like we were talking about,
yeah.
frumenty or something, big oatmeal or something, you need to spread that surface area out so that it can come down to 70 degrees in that 2 hour time frame. And then you can get it from there into the refrigerator and it can come down to below 41 in the next 4 hours.
Th-
And that's the safe way of
That's also good to know because if I do like jams and stuff, I put them out in the jars and then they're still sitting because they're again
they are too hot.
we've taken
So,
chemistry class. I know how
right,
that goes, you
right,
know.
right, right. Exactly.
And
So,
only once have we left the chicken out overnight by accident because I cooked it later in the day. We're like, well, nope, that's chucked, obviously.
yeah,
But yeah, it's
dog
usually
food
an
at that
hour,
point. Right.
maybe
But
two.
yeah, so
Yeah.
2 hours to get it from the cooking temperature to room temperature or around 70 degrees. And if it means putting an ice bat in it or spreading it down into smaller containers or whatever to make that happen, that's when you have to take some kind of action. But then from there, after it's at 70 or room temperature, it can go into the fridge and
Yeah.
finish the cooling process in the
Yeah,
refrigerator.
basically as soon as I
Yeah.
can touch the glass, I chop up the chicken and put it in the fridge. But
Well, even then, I mean, you're
I've got
making
asbestos fingers, it's okay.
you're making your refrigerator work harder though, and you're heating
Yeah.
everything else up in your refrigerator if you put it in before it's down to room temp.
Yeah.
No, well, I mean, they just the glass doesn't usually go in. I chop up the there's
Right,
plenty of
right,
space in
right.
the
Well, I
fridge too.
mean, yes, and you're
Yeah.
right when you're talking about something as small as a chicken
Well,
breast.
okay, when you think on a
Yeah,
bigger scale,
but
yes,
if you're
yes,
dealing with
okay.
something bigger like a Dutch oven of soup, right? You got a Dutch oven, something big enough that would still small enough that would go in your fridge that you could
Right.
conceivably put in whole. That's when you're going to start having troubles because you've got more depth and volume inside of it. So, but yes, you have time to move
Okay.
it from cooking temp to room temp by just letting it cool down.
To say we haven't gotten sick yet, so clearly I've been doing it right.
Well, okay, and I want to touch on something that I have just recently learned by almost dying. And so don't do that. I ended
That
up
would
in
be
the
the sort of thing
hospital at Thanksgiving 3 years ago now. And 2022. Yeah, 3 years ago. Um, it started with food poisoning. And then it went to acute diverticulitis and a perforated colon and an abscess. And like I said, it almost killed me.
Oh.
And what became apparent to me during that episode is that all through my food service career, they have told us the elderly and people with compromised immune systems and infants are um, danger, not, what's that called? At risk. They're at risk populations. And you have to be extra careful with those populations, right? And I always associated with that, well, elderly have got more health problems. They might be, their immune systems might not be so good, etc. Having gone through this process of having diverticulitis, food poisoning, kick off diverticulitis that almost killed me, I realize now that it's not that I'm in poor health because I'm not, but as a senior citizen now, because I turned 65 in February coming up, I have geriatric issues, and diverticulosis is one of those things that you get once you get past 55. Pretty much everybody in the United States over the age of 55 has got diverticulosis. And so when you encounter something like food poisoning, which food poisoning like that would have made me sick for a few days in my 40s, but in my 60s almost killed me. And the difference is because now I am older and I have different issues because I have gotten older. I have leveled up, right? And so it's not just, I wouldn't go and say, oh, well, I'm in poor health and so I have to be careful what I eat. I mean, I'm careful what I eat anyway, but it never would have occurred to me that I was just more at risk just because I have got different things going on in my body now than I did when I was 20 or 40. Yep, and so it becomes even more important that we pay attention, that we label things correctly, that we take every opportunity to ensure that we are being as careful as we possibly can to serve wholesome food to people who are coming to our feasts. And circling back around to what I said about allergies, I still think it's the responsibility of the diner to take that information and make their own best judgments for themselves. The lady in the salt class, the last hour in the salt class, was saying that she hadn't shared any of her salt. Is that her? She just popped back in. She was saying, yeah, you were saying that you didn't share your salt because you weren't 100% sure about your um the mineral content and all of that, right? You wanted to
Uh,
take
so it's more, well, I know that the testing of it at the ocean level of concentration is safe for things like heavy lead
right.
and
you're confident
potential
enough for
things.
you to taste it,
I
but
am absolutely confident for me to taste
you
it.
don't want to share that with other people and have that chance. And so I respect that. I just did a series of talks with the local historical society here on historical food preservation methods. And I gave a very similar talk at the beginning of that by saying, I have tested all of these food preservation methods. I have eaten everything up here to no ill effect. However, nothing
Mhm.
is pasteurized. And you have to make that decision based on what you know about your health, that if
Mhm.
you are going to take a chance on something that it's perfectly safe, but your body may not be used to a non-pasteurized version of this, and you might react adversely, so it's on you to make that decision. And that's where I feel like it's my responsibility as a provider to meet the diners. And like I said, a lot of people who cook in the SCA feel strongly about different levels of that. Some people want to make completely different meals for everybody that comes along. Worked in restaurants too long to want to do that. Right? That's not the
Um,
meal that I'm selling. Right? I'm putting out a feast. I can make certain accommodations, but if you have that many issues with the menu, here's the whole menu. You need to make the decision that this is not the menu for you.
yeah,
That personally, that's where I feel like is a
yeah.
reasonable thing to do. But I thought about that when you were talking about your salt. I'm like, yep, this is exactly what I went through with the historical food preservation. Because
Mhm.
I made like portable soup,
Yeah.
and I made
And at first, I didn't worry
sauerkraut,
about it.
and
And now I'm like much more cognizant of the fact that while I'm not worried about any kind of bacteria in it, I'm bringing it to a rolling boil. There's plenty of heat being applied to it to kill off any bacteria. I know that there's nothing super dangerous in the water at the levels of the water.
mhm.
It wasn't until recently that we're talking about like how much does it concentrate down like the heavy metals, and I need to do more testing on
And
that
microplastics.
and microplastics.
And
And so at
microplastics
this
is a
point,
whole
it's a
other
like
thing,
try
right?
it at your own risk.
Right.
I am happy to share it with you. I'm comfortable with it because I know that I'm getting it from a safe source generally. But
Right. Right. Okay, well, we have hit the top of the hour. I think there is
me next
another
again.
yeah, oh, that's right. We have the salt class coming up again. So I will stop my recording. Thank you everyone for attending. And if you have any questions, please get in touch with me. Askchefchristy.com or chefchristy@kingstaste.com. Those are easiest ways to get in touch with me. All right, let me stop our recording.